Stalin's secret weapon that made Nazis piss themselves. They banned talking about it. What if I told you the most terrifying sound of World War II wasn't machine guns, wasn't bombs, but this? That unearthly whistle rising from nowhere, then the sky itself tearing apart in a storm of fire and steel. German soldiers called it Stalin's organ. They weren't being poetic. They were describing the sound of 16 rockets screaming through the air, at once a noise so unnatural it broke men before the first explosion even hit. And here's what Stalin's regime did to protect this weapon. They erased its name from every document. They forbade soldiers from speaking it aloud. They shot engineers who leaked blueprints. Because this wasn't just artillery. This was psychological warfare forged in steel tubes mounted on the back of a truck. And on July 14, 1941, near the Belarusian city of Orsha, everything changed. The German 78th Infantry Division had been advancing for weeks. Their panzers rolled confidently through burning villages. Their officers drank captured vodka in commandeered houses. They believed the Soviet Union was collapsing. They had no idea that 90 seconds away their entire world would vanish. 90 seconds. That's all it took. A single battery of 7 trucks hidden in a birch forest. No warning shots. No artillery barrage to signal an attack. Just sudden hell unleashed. 1 minute German soldiers were lighting cigarettes, the next the horizon erupted in fire. 16 rockets per truck, 112 steel, shrieking projectiles transforming 3 square kilometers into an instant apocalypse. Trees vaporized. Tanks flipped like toys. Men simply disappeared. When the smoke cleared, German medics found soldiers still alive but catatonic, their hands clawing at their own faces, their ears bleeding, their minds shattered not by wounds but by sound. The whistle. That rising, falling whistle that meant death was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. And the worst part for the Germans, they couldn't fight back. No coordinates to return fire to. The Katyusha crews followed one brutal rule: shoot and run. 10 seconds to launch the entire salvo, 30 seconds to reverse out of position, 2 minutes to be 10 kilometers away while German artillery desperately shelled an empty forest. By nightfall, German high command received fragmented reports describing weapons that didn't exist in any intelligence file. Some officers claimed the Soviets had deployed secret jet bombers. Others insisted it was experimental aircraft. Nobody believed a truck could do this. But the truth was far more terrifying. The weapon that broke the Wehrmacht that day wasn't even supposed to exist. Its creation was an accident born from desperation and paranoia. Let's rewind to 1933, when Soviet rocketry began not in military labs but in the minds of dreamers. The Group for the Study of Reactive Motion, better known as GERD, became the unlikely cradle of Soviet rocket power. Among its members, a young engineer named Sergei Korolev worked alongside Mikhail Tikhonravov and Georgy Langmak. These men weren't building weapons. They were chasing the stars. Korolev dreamed of orbital flight. Tikhonravov sketched lunar landers on cafeteria napkins. Langmak calculated trajectories for interplanetary travel. But Stalin's paranoia had other plans. The Great Purge arrived in 1937 like a winter storm. Korolev was dragged from his apartment at midnight accused of sabotage. He spent months in Lubyanka prison, then years in Kolyma gold mines, his hands broken by forced labor. Langmak was executed by firing squad in January 1938, his body dumped in an unmarked grave. Tikhonravov survived only because Beria saw potential in his rocket calculations. The dreamers were gone. Only the survivors remained. And they learned a brutal lesson: innovation without political protection meant death. So when the remaining engineers at Scientific Research Institute No. 3 received orders to develop battlefield rockets, they understood the stakes. Failure meant the Gulag. Success meant survival. But not freedom. Never freedom. The institute operated under suffocating secrecy. Engineers worked in isolated cells, forbidden from discussing projects even with colleagues in adjacent rooms. Blueprints traveled in sealed envelopes carried by NKVD officers with shoot-to-kill authority. Workers assembling rocket motors wore blindfolds during final stages. Why such extreme measures? Because Stalin feared one thing more than German invasion: technological surprise. He knew Hitler's scientists were advancing rapidly. He couldn't risk German intelligence learning about Soviet rocket progress, even if that progress was primitive. The early rockets were embarrassingly crude. The RS-8 2mm rocket developed in 1938 tumbled wildly in flight. Accuracy beyond 500 meters was pure luck. The warhead contained less explosive than a standard artillery shell. German officers who later examined captured specimens dismissed them as toys. They missed the point entirely. Soviet engineers weren't trying to build precision weapons. They were building terror weapons. And terror doesn't require accuracy. It requires volume. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: agricultural engineering. Tikhon remembered his student days studying crop dusting equipment. Farmers used simple rails to launch pesticide canisters across fields. No complex mechanisms. No recoil absorption. Just rails and propulsion. He sketched a radical idea: mount multiple rails on the back of a standard ZIS-6 truck. Fire all rockets simultaneously. Overwhelm targets through sheer volume rather than precision. The design was so simple it bordered on genius. 8 launch rails initially, later 16. No moving parts beyond the firing mechanism. Reloads carried in wooden crates stacked beside the cab. The entire system could be manufactured in tractor factories with minimal retooling. When Tikhon presented his proposal to Beria, the secret police chief stared silently for 3 minutes. Then he spoke one sentence: "If this fails, your wife and children will disappear before dawn. Begin production immediately." The first prototypes rolled out in early 1941. Testing occurred at night in remote steppe locations. Even then, secrecy remained absolute. Test crews wore hoods during transport. Firing coordinates were given orally, then immediately forgotten. After each launch, teams scrubbed the launch site, removing every spent casing, every footprint, every trace of human presence. Stalin personally reviewed grainy film footage of test launches. He watched rockets streak across the night sky, leaving fiery trails. He listened to audio recordings of the whistle. And he made a decision that would haunt German soldiers for 4 years: approve mass production. But with one condition: the weapon would have no official designation. No factory stamps. No serial numbers. It would exist only as rumor. Only as nightmare. The nickname Katyusha emerged not from military planners but from factory workers. A popular song by Mikhail Blanter titled Katyusha had swept the Soviet Union in 1938. Its lyrics told of a girl named Katyusha waiting for her beloved to return from the frontier. Workers assembling the launchers hummed the tune during grueling 12-hour shifts. The name stuck, not because of official decree but because humans need poetry even when building instruments of death. Stalin approved the nickname precisely because it sounded harmless. German intelligence intercepting radio chatter mentioning Katyusha would dismiss it as sentimental nonsense. They did exactly that. For 18 months, German signals intelligence logged hundreds of Katyusha references, categorizing them as morale songs, not weapons systems. The deception held until the weapon spoke for itself over the fields of Belarus. But the Katyusha story cannot be told without confronting its darkest secret: the human cost of its creation. The Voronezh mechanical plant where launchers were assembled operated under NKVD supervision. Workers received food rations based on production quotas. Fall behind and your family received half rations. Miss 2 consecutive quotas and you disappeared into the night. Engineers who suggested design improvements faced interrogation. Was this genuine innovation or sabotage disguised as progress? One designer proposed adding armor plating to protect crews. He was arrested for defeatism, accused of implying Soviet soldiers needed protection. He died in a transit camp 3 weeks later. The trucks themselves carried hidden histories. Many ZIS-6 chassis came from factories recently converted from civilian production. The same assembly lines that once built delivery trucks for Moscow bakeries now mounted rocket rails for killing machines. Mechanics working on these trucks sometimes found remnants of their civilian past: a faded bakery logo under layers of military paint, a child's crayon drawing tucked behind the dashboard left by a factory worker's son. These small human traces vanished under fresh coats of olive green paint, but they remained ghosts in the machine. The rockets told even darker stories. Rocket motor casings were often stamped with factory codes from plants deep in the Urals. Some casings bore the marks of prison workshops where inmates assembled components between beatings. Survivors later described working 16-hour shifts soldering rocket fins while guards shouted that each completed rocket meant one less day in the Gulag. Few believed them. Most worked until their hands bled, then collapsed from exhaustion, only to be dragged back to work by guards pouring cold water on their faces. This was the true origin of the whistle that would terrify Europe. Not from laboratories of genius, but from workshops of despair. Not from patriotic fervor, but from survival instinct. Each rocket carried the silent screams of its makers along with its explosive payload. When Operation Barbarossa exploded across the Soviet border on June 22, 1941, the Katyusha program faced extinction. German panzers advanced at shocking speed. Minsk fell in days. Smolensk looked certain to follow. The Voronezh plant lay directly in the invasion path. Evacuation orders came at midnight on June 25th. Workers had 6 hours to dismantle assembly lines, crate machinery, and load everything onto eastbound trains. They worked frantically by flashlight, tearing apart equipment they'd spent months installing. Some workers sabotaged their own tools rather than let Germans capture them. Others hid critical jigs and fixtures in nearby forests, planning to retrieve them after liberation. The evacuation trains departed just as German reconnaissance planes appeared on the horizon. They carried not just machinery but people. Engineers, their families, factory workers, political officers, all crammed into boxcars with machinery. The trains traveled east for 17 days, stopping only for coal and water. Passengers ate dried bread and drank melted snow. Children cried from hunger, but adults remained silent, focused on survival. They finally stopped near the Ural Mountains in a town called Kirov. There, with no proper facilities, no electricity, no shelter, they rebuilt the factory in 37 days. Workers slept in tents through autumn rains. Engineers designed modifications by candlelight. And on August 10, 1941, the first Katyusha rolled off the reassembled line. Its chassis bore mud from 3 republics. Its rockets contained steel smelted in relocated furnaces. Its crew would be conscripts who'd lost homes to the invasion. This wasn't industrial production. It was national resurrection forged in desperation. And it was about to announce itself to the world. The battery that struck near Orsha on July 14th operated under Captain Ivan Flerov, a 29-year-old artillery officer with no rocket experience. His crew consisted of 19 men, average age 21. Many had never fired a weapon in anger. Their training lasted 72 hours. Drill 1, position the launcher. Drill 2, connect firing wires. Drill 3, reverse at maximum speed after launch. No live fire practice. No tactical instruction. Just 3 drills repeated until exhaustion. They received their orders on July 13th. Move to grid sector Delta 7 Charlie. Wait for launch command. After firing, withdraw to Rally Point Romeo. Do not under any circumstances allow capture of launcher or rockets. Thermite charges were issued with explicit instructions. Light them if capture is imminent. The thermite would melt the launcher's rails into useless slag within 90 seconds. Each crew member also received a single bullet. Not for the enemy, for themselves. The order was unambiguous. Better death than interrogation. Better suicide than revealing secrets. They moved into position after midnight on July 14th. Darkness covered their approach. The birch forest provided natural camouflage. Flerov positioned his 7 launchers in a staggered line 200 meters apart. This dispersion prevented a single artillery strike from eliminating the entire battery. At 0300 hours, German radio traffic increased. Flerov's forward observer, a 19-year-old private named Alexei, reported enemy movement through field glasses. German infantry forming up for dawn assault. Armor concentration behind tree line. Perfect target. Flerov radioed division headquarters requesting fire mission approval. The reply came instantly. Execute. No confirmation needed. No second guessing. Stalin himself had granted forward commanders unilateral authority to deploy Katyushas against mass German formations. At 0355, Flerov gave the order. Crews connected firing wires to central control boxes. Drivers killed engines to prevent backfiring sparks. Gunners took positions behind trucks ready to reverse immediately after launch. Flerov raised his hand. The forest fell silent except for distant German voices singing marching songs. He lowered his hand. Hell arrived. 112 rockets ignited simultaneously. The sound wasn't an explosion, it was a physical force hitting the chest like a hammer. Flames engulfed the launchers. The trucks shuddered violently, threatening to flip over. For 10 seconds, the world became fire and noise. Then silence broken only by the rising whistle of rockets in flight. Flerov didn't wait. He shouted, "Reverse." Trucks lurched backward, tires spinning in soft earth. Within 40 seconds, the entire battery was moving east at maximum speed. They didn't look back. They didn't need to. The sky behind them turned orange, then white, then black with smoke. German positions ceased to exist. Battalion headquarters vaporized. Command radios silenced permanently. Medical tents became crematoriums. But the real damage wasn't physical. It was psychological. German soldiers who survived described an experience beyond combat terror. The whistle rising, then falling like a demon's laughter. The inability to take cover because death came from the entire sky at once. The realization that no trench, no bunker, no armor could save you. By afternoon, German commanders reported mass cases of combat hysteria. Soldiers refusing orders. Men shooting themselves in the foot to escape the front. Officers filing reports with phrases like "weapon of demonic origin" and "psychological disintegration of units." One German major wrote in his diary, "We have faced tanks, artillery, aircraft, but never before have I seen grown men weep like children begging for their mothers as the whistle approaches. This is not war. This is damnation." That evening, Hitler received a personal briefing. His reaction was immediate and brutal. He issued Führer Directive 17, a secret order distributed only to division commanders. Any Soviet soldier captured operating these rocket launchers is to be executed immediately as a terrorist. No traídos. No prisoner of war status. Their weapons are to be destroyed on sight, no specimens captured for study. The reason Hitler feared the Katyusha wasn't its destructive power. It was its symbolism. A crude, simple weapon built on trucks that should have been obsolete, proving that Soviet industry, despite massive losses, could still innovate faster than German engineering. The message was clear: the Soviet Union wasn't collapsing. It was adapting, and it was doing so with weapons the Reich couldn't even name. German intelligence scrambled to understand what hit them. Reconnaissance flights photographed the Orsha impact zone. Analysts studied crater patterns. They concluded the weapon fired multiple unguided rockets from mobile platforms. But they couldn't determine range, reload time, or production capacity. Most critically, they couldn't replicate the psychological effect. German engineers developed the Nebelwerfer, a 6-barrel rocket launcher, by 1943. But it was a pale imitation. Heavier, slower to reload, lacking the Katyusha's mobility. German crews required 10 minutes to reload between salvos. Soviet crews did it in 90 seconds. The difference was doctrinal. Germany treated rocket artillery as supplementary support. The Soviets built entire armies around it. By 1944, the Red Army deployed entire rocket artillery divisions. 500 launchers operating as a single unit. Their tactics evolved too. Feint attacks with a single battery to draw German reserves, then the main strike hitting the weakened sector. Night operations using star shells to illuminate targets, then immediate saturation fire. Urban warfare in Berlin, where Katyushas fired horizontally down city streets, turning entire blocks into kill zones. The weapon's final evolution came with the BM-31 Andriusha, a monster mounting a 300mm rocket capable of leveling apartment buildings with a single warhead. During the Vistula-Oder offensive, Soviet commanders used Andriushas to destroy German command bunkers that conventional artillery couldn't penetrate. One documented case near Kustrin, a single Andriusha rocket collapsed a reinforced concrete bunker, killing General Rainer Stahel, commander of the fortress. No warning. No see. Just one rocket and a strategic target eliminated. But the Katyusha's legacy extends far beyond World War II. When the war ended, Soviet engineers didn't retire the design. They exported it. Koreo 1950. Chinese Katyushas decimated American positions at the Chosin Reservoir. Vietnam, 1968. Viet Cong modified BM-13s, hidden on jungle trails, ambushed entire convoys.
Afghanistan 1980.
Mujahideen crews turned captured Soviet launchers against their former owners. The Middle East 1973. Egyptian and Syrian Katyushas broke Israeli defensive lines in the Golan Heights. Even today in modern conflicts you hear that same whistle. Modified Katyushas fired by non-state actors across Africa and the Middle East. The design is 80 years old yet remains brutally effective. Why? Because it solves a fundamental problem of warfare: how to deliver massive firepower with minimal logistics. No rail lines needed. No forward bases. Just a truck, some rockets, and a driver willing to shoot and run. But perhaps the most haunting legacy of the Katyusha isn't military, it's cultural. That popular song Katyusha, written in 1938, before the weapon existed, became the war's unofficial anthem. Soldiers sang it around campfires, not knowing they were singing the name of the weapon that would save them. The lyrics speak of a girl waiting for her beloved to return from the frontier. In wartime, that frontier became the front lines. The beloved became every soldier hoping to survive. And Katyusha herself became both the girl waiting at home and the steel angel raining fire on the enemy. Two meanings, one name. A perfect Soviet paradox. Innocence and annihilation sharing the same breath. Today, the Katyusha rests in museums, its trucks rusting behind glass, its rockets inert. School children take selfies beside it, unaware of the terror it once inspired. But in archives across Europe, you can still find the evidence. German after-action reports with handwritten notes in the margins. Phrases like the whistle, the whistle, the whistle repeated like a mantra. Medical records listing shell shock cases spiking dramatically after Katyusha engagements. Even Goebbels' propaganda ministry attempted damage control, issuing directives to German newspapers never to mention the weapon by name, referring to it only as Soviet long-range artillery. They knew acknowledging its psychological impact would be admitting defeat not on the battlefield but in the mind. And that was the true genius of Stalin's secret weapon. It wasn't the rockets. It wasn't the trucks. It was the sound. That rising, falling whistle that announced death was coming, and there was absolutely nothing you could do about it. A sound so terrifying German soldiers would later claim they could hear it in their dreams years after the war ended. A sound that proved sometimes the most powerful weapons aren't the most accurate or the most advanced. They're the ones that break the human spirit before the first explosion even hits. The Katyusha never won a battle by itself. No weapon does. But it won something more valuable: time. Time for Soviet industry to relocate east of the Urals. Time for new tank factories to open. Time for the Red Army to learn from its early disasters. Every minute German troops spent huddled in terror, every kilometer they retreated after a Katyusha strike, every officer lost to psychological collapse bought Stalin's generals the one resource they desperately needed. Time to build the weapons that would actually win the war: T-34's IS-2's modern artillery. The Katyusha was never meant to be the war winner. It was meant to be the war staller, the terror weapon that held the line until real weapons arrived. And in that role, it succeeded beyond anyone's imagination. Over 11,000 Katyusha launchers produced during the war. Over 20 million rockets fired. Every major Soviet offensive from Moscow to Berlin opened with their scream. Yet when victory parades marched through Red Square in 1945, no Katyushas rolled past the Kremlin. Stalin excluded them deliberately. Why? Because the weapon story was too messy, too tied to purged engineers, too dependent on teenage crews executed for minor infractions, too psychologically brutal for the sanitized victory narrative he wanted to sell. So the Katyusha vanished from official history almost as completely as it had vanished from German positions in 1941. But history has a way of remembering what regimes try to forget. Today, military academies study the Katyusha not for its engineering but for its doctrine. The principle of shoot and scoot, now standard for all rocket artillery worldwide, originated with those teenage crews racing away from launch sites in 1941. Modern systems like America's HIMARS or Russia's Tornado S are spiritual descendants of that birch forest near Orsha. Same philosophy: maximum firepower, minimum exposure. The whistle may have changed from rocket scream to jet engine whine, but the terror remains identical. Because war hasn't changed. Men still break under sounds they can't comprehend. Armies still collapse when death arrives from the entire sky at once. And sometimes the most powerful weapons aren't the ones that kill the most soldiers. They're the ones that make soldiers stop being soldiers, that reduce trained warriors to trembling boys clawing at their own faces begging for a terror to end. Stalin understood this. Hitler understood it too late. And every commander since has studied the lesson written in fire and blood across the Eastern Front. Never underestimate a weapon that attacks the mind before it attacks the body. Never dismiss crude, simple designs as inferior. And never ever underestimate the power of a name. Little Kate, a girl's nickname, a love song, a weapon that broke the Wehrmacht not with precision but with poetry of destruction. The whistle rising, the whistle falling, and in between the sound of an empire realizing it had met something it couldn't conquer. Something that didn't care about German engineering or Prussian discipline or Aryan superiority. Something that only understood one language, the language of fire. And it spoke that language fluently, until there was nothing left to burn, until there was no one left to hear the whistle, just silence, and ash, and the memory of a sound that still haunts the nightmares of those who heard it once and lived to tell the tale. Stalin's secret weapon wasn't secret because it was advanced. It was secret because its power came from a truth too uncomfortable to admit. Sometimes the most terrifying weapons aren't built in laboratories. They're born from desperation, forged in paranoia, and wielded by children who never got to grow up. The Katyusha wasn't a machine. It was a scream, and 80 years later, if you listen closely in the right archives, you can still hear it. Rising, falling, waiting for the next war to give it voice again. Because weapons like this never really disappear. They just wait, patient, silent, ready to scream once more when the world forgets what that whistle means, and what it costs to hear it. The true cost wasn't measured in German casualties. It was measured in Soviet souls. The engineers who died in gulags after perfecting the design. The factory workers who starved while building launchers. The teenage crews who shot themselves rather than face capture. The families who never learned why their sons disappeared. This was Stalin's real weapon, not rockets, but human sacrifice on an industrial scale. And it worked, not because the technology was brilliant, but because the human spirit, when cornered, will accept any price for survival. Even the price of becoming monsters. Even the price of building weapons that haunt your own dreams. The Katyusha's whistle wasn't just terror for Germans. It was the sound of a nation choosing survival over humanity. And that choice echoes still in every conflict where desperation breeds innovation, where simple weapons terrify sophisticated armies, where the whistle rises once more promising not victory but survival at any cost. Listen closely. Can you hear it? Faint but unmistakable. The whistle rising, the whistle falling, the sound of history repeating itself. Because we never really learn. We just build new Katyushas with new names and pretend the whistle sounds different this time. But it doesn't. It never does. It's always the same sound. The sound of the end of the world arriving 10 seconds early. And there's nothing you can do about it except close your eyes and wait for the fire to come. That was the lesson of Orsha. That was the lesson of Stalingrad. That is the lesson waiting for the next generation of soldiers who think they've seen everything war can offer. They haven't. Not until they hear the whistle. Not until they understand that the most terrifying weapons aren't the ones that kill you. They're the ones that make you wish you were already dead before the first rocket even lands. That was Stalin's gift to the world. Not a weapon, but a question. How much humanity are you willing to sacrifice for survival? The Katyusha's answer was everything. Absolutely everything. And in the forests of Belarus in 1941, that answer proved sufficient. Sufficient to stop an empire. Sufficient to buy time. Sufficient to win a war. At a cost nobody counted until it was too late. The cost written not in budgets or production numbers, but in the silence of families who never received answers. In the unmarked graves of engineers who dreamed of stars but built weapons instead. In the nightmares of boys who became men by pulling a single lever and unleashing hell. That is the true story of the Katyusha. Not a weapon, a bargain with the devil. And like all such bargains, the price came due long after the victory parades ended. Long after the medals were awarded. long after everyone pretending to be heroes had gone home to wives who never understood what their husbands carried inside. The whistle doesn't fade with time. It just gets quieter, waiting, always waiting for the next war to set it free again. And when that day comes, you'll hear it once more, rising, falling, and in between the terrible, beautiful silence where hope goes to die. That is the legacy of Stalin's secret weapon. Not victory, not glory, just the eternal whisper of fire waiting to be born again. Because humanity never learns. It only forgets. And forgetting is the first step toward hearing the whistle one more time.